Welcome back to Rammin is Racing live on Kaulignation, the YouTube channel. I'm Sean. We are joined tonight by a special guest. We will get to him momentarily. On tonight's episode, we're going to be talking about the bold new future for Kaulig with Ram and likely Dodge down the road. Charter drama heated up today in NASCAR. The NASCAR playoffs. Can SVG have a chance at making it past round one? The NASCAR playoff structure, will it change after this year? And lots of silly season talk. First up, my co-host in these shenanigans, Ryan. What's going on, man?
Hey, how you doing, Sean? I'm very happy to join you this evening for our second episode of Rammin is Racing. It's been a fun topic for us over the last week to get this kind of off the ground with the news of Dodge coming into, I should say, Ram coming into the sport with the trucks and just our general all-encompassing NASCAR coverage. And boy, we picked a doozy of a week to get involved with this because there is no shortage of topics to discuss, and I'm looking forward to getting into it tonight.
Yeah, I feel like between this and the other two social media jobs and content creation jobs I'm involved in, and my normal job and family stuff, I've barely had a second to breathe. It's been a crazy week. But we're joined tonight by a special guest. It's been on the channel once before. Ryan wasn't here, though, the last time he was here. This time, all three of us are here. It is NASCAR reporter Owen Johnson from cupscene.com. How's it going, man? And we really appreciate you doing this tonight.
Hey, it's great to be back on. I was just saying it's been just about a year since I was last on. I was on at Darlington weekend last year, which because of the special schedule, that was the week to get into the playoffs. And now it's Darlington weekend, first week of the playoffs this year. And so I'm so excited to be back and a lot to talk about with this channel.
Yeah, there's a ton going on right now. It's hard to wrap your head around it all, but we're going to do our best to dive into it. If you're watching, whether you're watching live or after the fact, I know most people watch after the fact, considering the time we go live at. Please take a moment to click the like button, subscribe, and turn notifications to all to keep up with all of our content. And you can follow us at a variety of places on social media right there. It would be appreciated. Let's not waste any time because there's a lot to get to, and I don't think I intended to spend as much time on the NASCAR charter stuff, but given what has come out today, I feel like we need to get to that as quickly as we can. But first, let's start with the NASCAR playoffs, man. We're getting off to a start this weekend at Darlington, race 1 of 3 in the round of 16. Ryan and I just did a episode on our Patreon where we dove into a bunch of stats. It's available over on our Patreon, patreon.com/Kaulignation. The link is in the description below, where we were taking a look at a variety of different stats, and we were choosing who we thought the 4 drivers would be that got eliminated after round 1 of the playoffs. And we will throw that question to you, man. When you look at this field of 16, and I do believe I have a graphic here, if you bear with me. Who do you think isn't going to make it out of round 1? Because it's some tough competition.
Yeah, I mean, I think when I look at round 1, I think it's always a round of survival, right? When you get to the later rounds, it's kind of a question of, who's the best 4, who's the best 1. But right now it's a question of, can you get through this round, not make mistakes, and get into the top 12? The first round is a difficult set of tracks to do it. It's Darlington, Gateway, and Bristol. And I think the last time Darlington was the playoff opener 2 years ago, most of the playoff field had some sort of issue, whether a wreck, some contact, something on speeding on pit road, something like that put them on the back foot. Last year, when Darlington was the last race of the regular season, I remember Martin Truex crashed out on lap 4 and nearly lost the transfer position that he came in with a healthy margin. So I really think this round is all about just survival. And I think it's a hard one to predict for that reason. But I mean, I've looked a little bit at the numbers here. And like you, I like to look at the stats. I thought the relevant one here was just average finishes for each track in the round. And so what the data tells me is that the drivers with the worst average finishes on these 3 tracks combined are, and this is going to be not too much of a surprising list, but it's Austin Dillon, Alex Bowman, Josh Berry, and SVG. In other words, the 4 drivers who enter below the cut line. So not a particularly bold pick. And I admit that I don't think the data says everything. Not every driver has raced on each track the same amount of times. SVG has never raced at Gateway in the Cup Series. But especially since I think this round is just so hard to predict, I'm going to lean on the data, and I'm going to say those 4 drivers, the 4 coming in under the cut line, are not going to make it out.
Yeah, this was interesting because I looked at the stats last night, and Alex Bowman has been running almost as good as anybody in the sport over the course of the last handful of races. How do you feel his placement in this shakes out? You just mentioned his stats at this particular set of tracks is challenging, but he's a driver that I feel like has a chance to make a deep run.
I agree with you, and I think he made a pretty deep run until obviously he ended up losing out at the Roval last year, but he made a pretty deep run last year. I think he has the potential, but the problem is I just think that there's so many drivers right now who have that same potential. I could see Wallace making a solid run because he has pretty good stats at Darlington. I could see Reddick making a deep run in a similar position in the playoffs. So I think that the bubble drivers are just so difficult to predict at this point that I just think that Bowman doesn't have the stats that I would like to see coming into these races.
Yeah, I like that you pulled up those numbers from the actual tracks that they're running at in round 1. That's not something we had. I like to lean into momentum a bit, not just in NASCAR, but professional sports in general. I know people will look at the full body of work over a season and take that, but I find whether it's, NASCAR, hockey, baseball, football, whatever, it's more about what you've done for me lately. I do think your stats are super relevant, but over the course of the last 7 oval tracks, since there are no road courses in round 1, Ryan and I were surprised to find out Ross Chastain's average finish is 25.1, which ranks dead last by a considerable margin over everyone. Does that stat surprise you at all?
It kind of doesn't, just because of where he's been running, but I think that whole team has been on a bit of a, and by that whole team, I'm sort of talking about Ross and then also the 99. SVG's kind of been on another perspective with the road course success and then oval journey. But that whole team, I think, has had a difficult summer. So I think they really need to get in their groove with these next couple of races. But when I look at Chastain's stats specifically, he has really good stats at all these tracks. 12.2 average finish at Bristol puts him very much in contention with some of the other drivers. 14th at Gateway. I think this is a very good round for him. It's a question of momentum, like you say, but if he can find that momentum and turn in the finishes that he's been putting in past years, I think it'd be difficult to see him get eliminated here.
I think the other thing that stood out to us was, I think when people look at this group of 16 drivers, 2 of the people that I think they have rated pretty low going into round 1, I'm just talking what I've seen on the internet, on X, etc., is Austin Dillon and Josh Berry seem to be whipping boys going into this first round. But when you look at their average finish over the last 7 oval tracks, they're 8th and 9th respectively, and I did not think they'd be that high. Does that number surprise you at all for those 2 guys?
It surprises me a bit, but I can understand that. I think the road courses have hurt those 2 drivers, especially. And so I think that they definitely have the potential on this round, which is really just a classic set of tracks for NASCAR, some relatively short ovals. And we know Dillon is good on the short ovals, won at Richmond. Berry has shown good performance this year with the short ovals. Obviously, he was really good at Richmond when he was subbing for Chase Elliott a couple of years back. So we know those 2 drivers are good on short ovals as well. So I think it's a round where they could be competitive, but they haven't done as well on these tracks in the past. Berry especially, though, just doesn't have the stats because he's new in this car. So most of his stats are coming from a car that wasn't performing, I think, quite to the level that the 21 has been able to achieve this year.
Yeah, I think one of the questions that I've really struggled with, because I think this is a very deep field of playoff drivers this year.
Yes.
I look at the history of what the fields have been, but this year, first round is all about survival, and I wholeheartedly agree with you. The conversation I had with Sean yesterday was, I think somebody or some issues in the first round, those are going to be the outs. But this first, sorry, you guys do hear me?
Yeah, I think you're going to have to go to your audio only, man, and maybe. Yeah,
I'm going to turn the camera off because I know
on us.
Yeah, I'm so sorry about that. I just wanted to touch on the tracks themselves. And you mentioned this round about survival, but I think this is one of the most traditional rounds we have in terms of the track types. And I think the talent we're going to see really separate themselves this round compared to maybe next round where there's a lot more variables in play. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I agree with that, and I think the numbers really don't lie. Again, I really like to look at the numbers here, and the drivers you see on the top of this list, Bell, Hamlin, Larson, Elliott, the drivers really at the top of the sport, at the top of their game on these ovals, are exactly the drivers you would expect to see on these kind of technical, short NASCAR ovals that we're really used to. So I really don't think at the top end it's going to be a big surprise who we see. Although I will point out Larson especially. Larson's, the number that stood out to me was the 20.6 average finish at Darlington. He's won at this track, and this is in the next gen era, all these finishes, I should say. He's won at this track in that time, or around that time, and he still has a 20.6 average finish as a result just of failing to finish some of these races. So a lot of it is just a question of survival, a question of who can put together consistent performance when the back becomes against the wall, when the playoff pressure starts rising.
Ryan, you got anything else on the playoffs you want to address, or should we move on?
Yeah, I mean, I think I really feel Owen hit the nail on the head with the drivers that are at risk. I personally thought it might be Joey Logano who has a chance of slipping out in this first round, but even though this is a stacked class of playoff drivers, I think the odds and what we've seen statistically kind of point to a pretty expected result, but that's why we go and run these races. So.
And I think if the first round in past years has been any indication, I would not be surprised if there's a story that comes out of this, if there's some driver who at least gets closer to the bubble than we think they might as after one or two rounds of this first round.
Absolutely. It just takes being in the wrong place at the wrong time, and all of a sudden you're in trouble. As you mentioned, Truex last year. All right, let's shift our focus here to NASCAR charter drama. Today, they met in court. I didn't intend to go over any of that because I didn't think we were going to get some of the spicy stuff. Basically, both sides hate one another's guts, and some pretty vile things said, like someone on the 2311 side referenced, maybe the best investment play is just waiting on Jim France to pass away, which is pretty vulgar thing to say, might I add. And Michael Jordan basically called out the other teams and called them a word I won't use on here, and basically told Joe Gibbs to go F off. Was it Steve O'Donnell told the teams to go bleep themselves? It was a bit of a wild day, but I want to get into the nitty gritty of what could happen here. Let's start off with this. I personally don't think NASCAR is going to be allowed to sell those charters yet. I'm not saying it's not going to happen once they get to trial, but I think the most likely outcome here is the teams won't be chartered, but NASCAR also will not be able to sell those charters until a solution comes from trial. But let's go with the what if. Let's say NASCAR is able to sell one of those charters. Do we really believe that two teams with deep pockets like 2311, and I mean, Michael Jordan is bragging about his deep pockets quite publicly right now, do we believe they would actually close down? Do you think they'll close shop, Owen, or do you think that's pandering?
Well, I think we're going to hear the strongest argument put forth from both sides ahead of this trial. So if 2311 can tell us, we're going to close shop, we're out of the sport if this doesn't go our way, I think they're going to make that argument. It would surprise me if, as you say, a team with deep pockets, a team that with an owner who certainly he might not like the management of the sport, but he certainly likes the sport itself. It would surprise me if we see them completely up and out, at least without a fight to stay in. But what I mean, I just want to focus just a little bit on kind of the nature of litigation here. The teams are applying just to set the stage for a preliminary injunction. So it concerns whether NASCAR is allowed to, in the interim before the actual main trial, which is going to be on the 1st of December, whether NASCAR is allowed to can be compelled to allow the teams to compete as if they were chartered, and whether they can be barred from selling the charters to other teams. So this is only a short-term stay in the litigation. So everything we've heard today, we're going to hear repeated again and again come December. So there's a lot more to keep going with this litigation. This is the second time they're going for injunction. The first time it was granted to the teams, vacated on appeal, and now they're running with a different argument specific to the sale of the charters to try to make the argument that there's irreparable damage caused to them. So obviously the point about coming out of the sport is the argument they're going to run for irreparable damage. It will cause them so much harm that it's not worth even staying in the sport if they lose the charters. Whether that's the case, I think we'll see come the outcome of the trial. But I think it really shows more than anything the animosity of the teams and NASCAR at this point. And I think it's going to be a really messy trial come December.
Yeah, I think one of the things I found most interesting from the judge, basically the judge's own mouth today, was if you think you're in position to win this, you're wrong. Basically telling both parties that, while they think they may have strong cases, the damage that they're doing if they don't find a settlement or an agreement would do irreparable harm to both entities in the long run. But I don't feel like, based off what we saw today in the pure animosity we've seen in the texts, that's really a possibility. While it might make sense to settle, I don't feel like that's really an option on the table anymore.
I mean, it seems to point to me to really deep structural problems with the sport. I mean, we focus on these two teams, right? And this animosity throughout the litigation. But most of these texts we're looking at are from the charter negotiation process. And if this is the sort of negotiation or really lack thereof between the teams in NASCAR, where they're just completely at each other's throats, really not trying to reach any sort of conclusion, but just extract as much as they can from each other, that doesn't look like a sustainable system going forward. So it really looks like there are some deep problems that NASCAR, the teams generally have, and something that I think they'll have to work out, certainly behind closed doors, the way NASCAR likes to do it, but something they will have to work out to keep the system alive generally, more than just this case.
Yeah, and I think that's what I'm most curious, because NASCAR, for literally its entire history, has worked kind of behind closed doors in the shadows. And what we heard today, and I think we kind of knew this just from following along, that if this thing does go to trial, all the dirty laundry comes out. And that is something we all know NASCAR wants no part of. What do you think we will actually find behind the closed doors if we get to that point? Or maybe that could steer us towards a settlement, knowing neither side really wants, I think, all of it out in the open.
I mean, I think we got more out in the open than NASCAR would have liked, even in this conversation here. The text conversations from their executives about really, I mean, there's plenty of examples where they're clearly quite in opposition to the teams, which I think the rest of the teams are definitely going to look at and think, come next charter negotiation, NASCAR's not negotiating in good faith here. This is what we are not coming at it in the same position we might have thought we were. So I think it's definitely caused damage to NASCAR's position going forward. And I don't think they're going to want more to come out. Like you say, both sides have got some of the best lawyers they can get. I think this will go to trial, but I do think there's going to be a lot more coming out. I couldn't possibly speculate what it necessarily will be, but I think there will be quite a bit of damage on both sides from it.
Sorry about that, fellas. It wasn't letting me unmute. Let's get to some of the parties here who are potentially affected by all this. So we have 2311 and Front Row, who have 3 charters apiece technically, that are up in the air. You have RIR Racing, who's in their own litigation because they wanted to sell their team for a whopping $150 million, which included 2 charters. And that's kind of eye-opening because out of all the Cup Series teams, I would suggest the team with the least value outside of RIR Racing is probably Hyatt Motorsports in terms of charter teams. And RIR Racing being worth $150 million is pretty eye-opening to me anyway. But Legacy claims that they agreed to purchase a charter from RIR. And the other part of this is RFK currently leases a charter from RIR, and they just signed a big money deal with Kroger. which put Ryan Preece in that 60 car. So like they really need to field 3 cars with all the sponsorship that they have. How do you see all this playing out? Like, is Rick Ware gonna get sold? Is Legacy gonna get the charter? Does the deal fall apart without 2 charters? Like, this is the most charter drama I've ever heard of in this sport to this day.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know enough about the facts of that case to tell you exactly where it's going to go. But what I think it really indicates for the bigger case, the 2311, the FRM case, which I think is bigger in terms of the impact of charters on the sport in the future. I think what it shows is NASCAR has a point that there is still plenty of interest in the charters. There are still teams that are interested in perhaps paying $150 million for 2, which would be a new record. The charter model is certainly bringing money into the sport. So I think we're seeing, even with all of the charter name being dragged through the mud with this litigation, people are still interested in it, and that interest shows no signs of dying down. And plenty of people, and these teams are willing to do a sort of offshoot litigation on the side just over the charters themselves.
So I think to that point, though, one of the main sticking points prior to the moment where NASCAR basically put the charter agreement in front of them and said, you sign by midnight or it's gone, the main sticking point was they wanted these charters to be permanent. And I think this is a big reason why, is that permanent charters would really not only hold their current value, but I would venture to say expand significantly in the very short future. So this, to the point, I actually think this helps the teams more than NASCAR, because this is what they're literally fighting for, is that without these charters being permanent, they could be stripped from them at a moment's notice, which is exactly what's happened with 2311 and Front Row.
Yeah, that's a good point as well. It definitely has really big implications for the argument overall. I think we'll see a lot about this trial referenced in the main trial in December on both sides at this point.
So one of the things that is mentioned in the 2311 and Front Row and NASCAR proceedings is NASCAR is ready to, and I believe the exact term that was used was transfer a charter, not necessarily sell one, but I would assume it would be a sale to a unmentioned team that has wanted to get in to the Cup Series for some time. And I know I'm not the only one that's drawn this conclusion. I saw Eric Estep draw this conclusion earlier this week, and I can't help but feel, fellas, that when they talk about this and they talk about wanting to generate more interest in NASCAR and popularity, and I think we all know who the most popular NASCAR driver is in the last 20 years, I really feel like that has Junior Motorsports written all over it. Do either of you get that vibe? We'll start with Owen. Could Junior Motorsports be the unnamed team in this, if there's an unnamed team at all, because it could be pandering?
Well, I want to stress that it's redacted in the court filing, so I think there's incentive from both sides not to reveal this for a while. But I think speculatively, I could see Junior Motorsports. That seems like a reasonable shot here, and I think it would be really interesting to pit up the popularity of Dale Jr. against the popularity of Michael Jordan in terms of who gets that charter. But again, I think it's redacted. I don't think we'll hear much about this for a while, but I think it will definitely have a big element in the trial, and it's another element that's allowed the teams to pursue NASCAR.
Yeah, that's a good point, and obviously it is just a speculative concept for where this goes. But just speaking what we were just talking about Rick Ware, where we know RFK has interest in this charter, Legacy has interest in this charter. It feels like the big teams that are out there that are openly looking for charters are kind of tied up in various conversations already. So the team that's up, I guess, feels like it's kind of swooping in under the radar would be Junior Motorsports. And Dale did mention at the top of the year that they want to go Cup racing. So that definitely leads credence to the thought. But just in addition to that, over the last couple of weeks, this is stuff I haven't heard until very recently. But it also sounds like there might be additional charters available through Haas Haas Racing and potentially even Hayek Racing, either selling or moving on from the sport. Have you heard anything about those two teams?
Yeah, I'm skeptical about the Haas rumors. I think they're staying where it is. Matt Weaver, I think a couple of days ago, reported that the team president, Joe Custer, Cole Custer's father, said in a statement that the team doesn't want its charters back and can't support any more teams. So I think they're definitely not expanding. They're definitely not looking for any of those new charters, and they're certainly not the team that we're talking about. But I don't see much indication that the team is downsizing. I think they've got a pretty comfortable position in the sport. They've got their 2 Xfinity and 1 Cup team, and I think they've suggested that they want to continue to grow that one team program for the time being. So it would surprise me if that is Haas.
I think the rumor I heard was it might be RFK trying to buy it. Was it RFK that's trying to buy them or someone else? I can't remember now. Hayek was a new one to me. I hadn't heard that until Ryan brought it up. But, there's got to be charters to go around. And NASCAR claims the 4 charters that they're holding on to are for new manufacturers coming into the sport. And we know Dodge will be inevitably coming in here soon, which we will talk about shortly. But Honda could still be, a decent bit off, despite Adam Stern linking Trackhouse to Honda possibly when they come in, given that all their other teams are on Honda. It feels like we're playing a game of musical chairs with NASCAR charters, and I'm not sure there's enough to go around for everyone.
Yeah, I definitely agree, and I think that's kind of the state of our sport at this point. Is it's just who can pay, who's willing to offer them, and it's just becoming more and more money to get in.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Let's shift gears here to some silly season talk. Our old buddy Justin Haley appears to be on the hot seat over at Spire Motorsports, and I can understand why to some extent. We already touched on the Haas thing, so we don't need to go there. But how do you see this shaping out for Justin Haley? It's not like there's a wide variety of options available for the 7 car. You could potentially see Daniel Suarez there, and Suarez does bring some of his own funding. I know, I can't remember who put it out there, but someone put out in The Athletic today that Ricky Stenhouse could be a possibility in the 7. I wonder if that would just be like a driver trade, which Justin's already been through one of them, basically, where Justin would end up over at Hayek and Stenhouse at Spire. How do you see this shaping up for the 7 car? Is there any chance that Justin Haley hangs on to this ride for another year, or do you think time's coming?
I mean, I definitely think he's on the hot seat regardless. I mean, Dickerson said recently on Sirius the team just isn't meeting expectations, really critical of the performance, and seemed like he was looking in other directions. I got to say, I don't like it. I think it's a bit too soon. We had the in-season swap last year where we're about a season on if you count where they switched in the middle of the season. We've done, at this point now, a season of him in the 7, and he lost his crew chief earlier in this year. So it hasn't really been a consistent stretch of races just to kind of get to know the team yet since really the summer of this year. And I think it's really a big stretch to try to go ahead and get rid of him, particularly when, there isn't a Stewart-Haas folding of driver talent coming in. You have Suarez, you have maybe Stenhouse, but both of those drivers, just where they're running. Stenhouse is 29th in points. Suarez is 27th in points in probably a better car. At least both of the other 2 teams other 2 cars from that team have won races. I just don't see a dramatically better driver that's worth taking away all of the learning that Haley has done with that team, all of the getting in with that new team and the new crew chief, especially when it's 2 other drivers are struggling to work together. We spoke to McDowell and Tosevar at Richmond about how Dickerson just really wasn't happy about the contact at Watkins Glen and how they need to work better together. I think there's a lot that team needs to work on kind of internally and getting its drivers more comfortable with the seats they're in before it starts immediately throwing them away and doing more in-season swaps or anything like that, from my perspective.
You kind of stole my thunder there, because that's where my question was going to go, Owen. It feels like Justin's getting thrown under the chair a little bit, but the performance at Spire, while certainly improved over the last handful of years, isn't exactly lighting the world on fire. I mean, Carson Hocevar, I think, is one of the best talents in the garage, and he is shown an immense amount of raw speed, but the results haven't really matched that speed. And Michael McDowell has been pretty average throughout the course of the year. It feels like while Spire has taken steps forward this year, none of the cars are really exceeding, and I don't feel Justin is that far behind those other drivers.
Yeah, I really completely agree with that. I think Hocevar's proven he's a driver who can really outperform his equipment. I think McDowell kind of is my benchmark for where those cars are running. And I mean, Haley's running a little worse, but I don't think he's running consistently worse than McDowell. McDowell's big performance is really coming on the road courses, and it's not that Haley's not that far behind throughout the other sort of tracks. So I don't think it's so dramatically bad that I would immediately want to get rid of Haley. And I certainly don't see any dramatically better talent that's worth getting rid of everything you've learned with that car and that team combination to exchange him for.
Yeah, it's not like that team's struggling for funding either. They got a big ticket deal with Gainbridge that's not driver related, it's team related. So, whoever comes into that 7 car, not that they can't bring their own sponsorship, teams always love, filling the bank account a bit more, but like Gainbridge is going to be on that car quite a bit regardless of, who's driving it. So I'm not saying Daniel Suarez isn't worth it, but there's definitely, it's a weird one, right? Like I could see if there was another significantly better driver available and Spire might be going, okay, this makes some sense, but I don't think there is. And there is one driver that we'll talk about in a different segment here who's available. We got to save him for that segment, but and I don't think he'd be a fit there because he's already been there. But I'm with you. I don't think that it makes sense to move on from Justin yet. Not to mention, like Rodney Childers, who is one of the more respected people in NASCAR and one of the more knowledgeable people who is going to come up in another one of our segments, just like someone else. You have him. He's there for a cup of tea, and then he's gone, and then you revert back to the crew chief Justin used last year. But the truth is, he wasn't with that crew chief very long last year either. So like, you're playing musical chairs with what he has to work with, and I will admit I expected a little more from Justin after seeing what he was able to get out of, not great Rick Ware equipment. And like Ryan said, I think the Spire equipment has been significantly better than where it was 2 or 3 years ago for sure. And I think that's why the owner is getting impatient. Like they're running Hendrick engines, and it sounds like they have more of a relationship with Hendrick than they've ever had before. And, you want results. You're spending money. You want results. I get it. And the investors want results. But I think to move on from a driver, you need someone a lot better. And like I know the Athletic linked Ricky Stenhouse, and I know he's got, great super speedway skills, but I don't know if I'm getting rid of Justin Haley to add Ricky Stenhouse.
And you're talking about a driver who also has pretty solid super speedway skills in Justin Haley. I mean, he hasn't won like Stenhouse has. Well, okay, he has won like Stenhouse has, but he won a rain shortened race, sort of an asterisk win. But he's proven that he can win a full race in the Xfinity Series, and he certainly has the super speedway skills to match.
Yeah, we saw that this weekend. He finished 3rd, right? Like he just showed it this weekend. It's super interesting with what we're seeing over at Spire. It doesn't make a lot of sense to see where they are running, but I also want to give credence a little bit to, I guess, the Roush Fenway and what they've been able to do with Ford, because when we saw Haley perform last year, yes, he was driving a Rick Ware car, but a lot of that, at least from what I understood, was supported by Roush Fenway, and I think a lot of that performance could be found there. So I think there's a bigger, implications in play besides just a driver and a team. There's the equipment matters, the crew chief and that relationship matters, and obviously Rodney Childers, who we all assumed would be an incredibly good fit, just wasn't, and things fell apart there. But I definitely tend to agree with everybody's statement that Justin Haley deserves another opportunity to prove that he's capable in that seat. But I guess then that kind of leaves the next question of where does Daniel Suarez go?
Yeah, I think it's a difficult point right now in the Cup Series to see Suarez. I don't expect to see him in the Cup Series next year, but there are seats becoming more and more available, it seems like sometimes. So we'll see. But I don't think he'll be in the Cup Series.
Yeah, I've heard him linked to 2 possible Xfinity rides. One with Junior Motorsports, obviously, that's the other one, but also heard him linked to Kaulig, and he's run a Kaulig car before. So, but one might question if another Kaulig ride is available as we switch topics here. And if you're not a Kaulig racing fan, the next half an hour of the show might not be for you. um, but that's where our bread and butter is at an SVG stuff. So we're gonna dive into the Kaulig racing stuff, and I'm gonna pull up some points here, and we will get to the Suarez stuff and the Ty Dillon stuff that I hinted at. But let's start off with the Ram announcement, man. You and I and Ryan have all been talking behind the scenes for a while, and it ended up happening, and it ended up happening at a level that not even we were prepared for. 5 fully funded trucks for the duration of the deal, rumored to be in the 8 to 10 year range. Obviously, it's a new OEM, so it's a big time deal. That's an outrageous amount of money in today's sport. How much did 5 trucks surprise you? It's a pretty big undertaking.
I mean, you know as well as I do because we spoke about it. It surprised all of us quite a bit, and I mean, I think it's just this. It's impressive how much they were able to keep it under wraps. I mean, I just think by comparison to talking about last year, we talked about the announcements for Daniel Dye and Christian Eckes, and I kind of walk into those announcements talking to some of my colleagues, and I know broadly what's going on there. To keep this entire announcement, this whole Ram deal under wraps, is really impressive. From Kaulig's point of view, and it's a really impressive deal to get that I think is really going to shape the future of their team in a big way. So a lot to talk about with Kaulig and their future and Ram generally.
So I'm going to give the audience here a little bit of a peek behind the curtain. We had heard that Ram specifically and Stellantis had met with Trackhouse at Charlotte earlier this year. I think it was Charlotte anyway. And so we were on that train, and we had heard things were happening behind the scenes. So we were fixated on this could be Trackhouse and eventually Dodge. But again, Trackhouse didn't have a Dodge team, or pardon me, a truck team. And we never really linked Kaulig to this Ram thing, even after the announcement, because they don't have a truck team. And I know Ryan and I have been harping on, the bandwagon for a couple of years that, like, if you want to get better at Cup, you need to be able to climb the ladder at an OEM. They didn't move to Ford when Ford acquired some teams. They didn't move to Toyota when Toyota acquired Legacy. And it's like, oh, great, we're stuck at number 4 at General Motors. Great. There's no pathway up there with the 3 that are in front of you. And then we kind of got tapped on the shoulder and said, hey, just so you know, Kaulig is looking at some new race shops in the Welcome, North Carolina area. And it's kind of like, well, why the hell would they be doing that? They have 2 shops, and that's good enough for Xfinity and Cup. And we were basically told, look, there's a good chance that Kaulig is going to go racing with Ram and the quote was add a few trucks, not 5 of them. And it turns out Kaulig Racing is going on this long-term deal with Ram, which, even though they're saying all the right things and trying to play nice to maintain whatever level of support they can from Chevrolet, I think the writing is on the wall. If I know Ryan and I think we've listened to every interview that has come out since this announcement, plus talked with some people behind the scenes. And outside of one reporter, I can say almost everybody else believes that, yeah, whether it's in 2027 or 2028, Kaulig is going to be at least one of those Dodge teams. And until then, they have to play nice. How do you see this going down? Because 2 OEMs I would say under one roof, but it feels like, to me anyway, that Chevrolet and NASCAR is involved in this too, as Chris Rice said, has basically told them, fine, you can, begin your transition to eventually Dodge, because we all see the writing on the wall, but those trucks cannot be in the same shop as where your Chevrolet cars get prepared. And there's not room anyways. I don't know if you've ever been to Kaulig Racing. We haven't, but I've taken like the virtual shop tour. Mamba Smith walked us through a tour last year of it. There's not room to prepare 2 or 3 trucks in those 2 shops, let alone 5. And I think Ty North summed it up best. We have 12 and a half pounds of stuff and only room for 5 pounds. So him and Chris Rice have both admitted that, yeah, they're going to add another shop in the Welcome, North Carolina area. But do you think it's been stipulated by Chevrolet in order to maintain the minimal support they get that, yeah, you can't have those trucks where you're preparing the other cars?
I don't know as much as you do about the shop situation, but it would not surprise me if Chevrolet would not support that arrangement. Where I think it becomes really interesting is the partnership with RCR. We've talked about this a lot, the One Welcome partnership. And so I spoke to AJ about this at Richmond, and we talked about this after. And I just thought his sort of answer was really interesting. So I want to kind of go over what he said there. I asked him, what does it look like on a day-to-day? What does the relationship look like with the RCR guys, with the shop, with the team? And he told me that the drivers will sometimes talk, but if I wanted specifics, I had to ask Chris Rice. And I thought that was really interesting, just because AJ's always really been involved in the business side of things, and he didn't really answer my question at all about the business practice, and which I think is something I would expect him to see more of. And so I also asked if RCR being fast at Richmond last year meant that he would expect to be fast at Richmond this year, and he said, no, it's just a hope and a prayer. And it wouldn't be really connected to RCR's speed. So he didn't explicitly say anything about the relationship, but I think he was certainly more willing to dodge it than I would have expected if there was some sort of joined at the hip relationship like, Wood Brothers and Penske, like Chris Rice sort of seemed to say it might be last year. It certainly isn't anything like that. I think there's some sort of technical partnership between the teams, but it's not anything that's going to tie them to Chevrolet long term. I don't think it's anything that's going to impact the transition to Dodge too much.
One of the things I think Sean listened as well this morning to Chris's weekly radio hit, and he brought something to my attention that I missed the first time, so I went back and listened, and it was very clear that they still had some discussions they needed to have with RCR, and I'm assuming Chevy as a whole over the next couple of weeks, and it seemed like it was strongly hinted that the performance of their Cup program and even potentially the existence of their Xfinity program kind of hung in the balance based off of what their partnership would look like with RCR going forward. So have you heard anything that would indicate that maybe this decision to move to Dodge has put that relationship at a point where it could completely dissolve?
I've not heard anything more about the relationship than what Allmendinger told me last week, which was not, or 2 weeks ago now, which was not too much. So I really don't know where that state of the relationship is. I'd be very curious to find out what they're willing to share after those talks go forward. But I think it's in a very different place than maybe we were sort of expecting it when we talked about the relationship last year, where we thought it might go.
Yeah, one of the things I want to point out is, Chris Rice is famous for, getting excited and saying too much. It was him that blew the doors off the hinges on the Ram truck thing a couple weeks ago when he definitely said too much, and then he very quickly tried to backtrack his comments. It's like, Chris, you already blew the doors open, man. You can't reseal the doors. They've been talking for like 2 months now, man, that Ty Dillon getting re-signed is going to happen. And then it quieted down, and then it sparked back up. Yeah, no, we're going to hope to get things done with Ty. And then the Dodge stuff came out, or the Ram stuff came out, and it's been more than a couple of weeks now since they were hoping to talk with Ty, and specifically, he mentioned in the interview that we need to talk with Richard too. It's our belief that Ty Dillon's sponsorship comes from deals with Richard Childers. We believe it's Richard Childers that made the C-Best deal with the owner, Stevie Stacks, of that product. And so I think it heavily hinges on there being a relationship between the two teams. And the longer this goes without an announcement of Ty Dillon re-signing, and in this, yesterday morning's radio hit, Chris sounded very unsure of where the partnership was going with RCR. Like, it's the most I've ever heard him be unsure of that partnership publicly in an interview. And it made me think about your interview with AJ Allmendinger. And it was like, okay, well, maybe RC, who most people view as super loyal to Chevy, and I feel like Austin Dillon might have been hitting that something after his win too with his comments. Loyal to a fault, I believe, was the quote he gave, and that him and Ty are trying to push him in new directions here. I can't help but feel that, no partnership with RCR means no ride for Ty Dillon.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think RCR is a team that's not willing to change its ways. It's still got the engine department. It is going to do things its way, and I think that way is always going to be a Chevy team for the foreseeable future. So Ty Dillon's place in that relationship, given the ties to RCR that he has, I think is interesting to follow. I agree with you.
Ryan, you got anything to add on Ty Dillon's future if there's no deal?
Yeah, I guess one thing I've always respected Ty Dillon is it felt like he said this himself that he wanted to do it his way. He wanted to go out and earn it. Maybe that's changed a little bit in recent years after his release from Legacy, but I guess I'm not fully convinced that if without RCR there's no Ty Dillon. And as we talked about in our last segment, there aren't a lot of good options available outside of Daniel Suarez. So while it's certainly dragging on longer than I expected it to, I still think there are other variables that could be in play that potentially could keep him in that seat with or without a relationship with RCR.
Well, I'd emphasize that one other point from Austin Dillon's comments actually after winning Richmond was he said not only is it him trying to change Richard Childress's mind, it's Ty Dillon too. So I wouldn't be surprised. I think it seems like more and more the two brothers are really getting involved with with the sort of management of the team. It seems to me, and this is entirely speculative, but it seems to me that Ty has more ties to RCR than he has previously in his career. And it wouldn't surprise me if after driving, he ends up in some sort of management role with that company. So I think that he will try to stick with, it wouldn't surprise me if he would try to stick with RCR in some capacity.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm sure Ty's preference would be to remain in the Cup Series, but there's all sorts of rumors surrounding Jesse Love that might leave RCR at the end of the year, their Xfinity driver. It's possible he ends up in an RCR Xfinity car next year, and that would be easily funded considering what he has. I don't know where that leaves the Kaulig 10 car, to be frank, but I am of the belief if they lose that partnership, not only is it going to be a lot tougher for them for a year, maybe two, depending on how long it takes the SRT division to develop a Cup car, that there's just no deal. I hate to say that Ty Dillon's being held hostage here, but it kind of, I know that's an over dramatic way of putting it, but it really feels that way to me. And I don't know where this is going to fall, but the fact that this thing was supposedly a slam dunk 2+ months ago, and here we are 2+ months later, it really feels like, a bit of the Daniel Hemrick stuff from last year and even the year before, where we kept hearing AJ's going to come back to Cup, AJ's going to come back to Cup, or AJ will be staying in Cup rather, and then we found out he was going to go to Xfinity. From a Kaulig perspective, this is kind of exactly how both those stories played out.
I mean, I think it just so happened that he joined the team right when they're going one direction and then veer off on another angle. It seemed like right when he joined the team, they're going to get this sort of really deep partnership with RCR and this maybe Penske Wood Brothers level of relationship. And that would work exactly for what he's looking for with this RCR connection. And then right midway through the season, it's no, we're going to move to Ram. We're going to change the entire direction of this team. And the RCR partnership is in doubt. And I think he just kind of ends up getting lost in the middle of the direction the team originally wanted to go that they probably aren't going at this point.
Yeah, I also want to point out there, you brought up AJ Allmendinger earlier. Allmendinger was on with Dave Moody, I think it was yesterday or the day before, and they were talking about Daytona. And again, without being as bold as he was over the radio, Allmendinger's like, yeah, we would have had a chance, but things happen that Kaulig Racing can't control, and no one at Kaulig Racing could have done anything to change what happened, and then we're taken out of any chance of making the playoffs. So it's really frustrating. And in between the lines, I'm reading there, that's more shots at ECR from AJ, which would be about the third time this year.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like the only time we hear something about RCR or ECR, their engine division, it is when the engine's let go and they're not happy with it. We don't ever hear RCR speed is why we're running up front or anything like that.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Ryan?
Well, it's just interesting you touched on the RCR speed because I know, Sean, this you've harped on this for quite some time, that it just feels like the RCR engines are adequate, but they aren't as strong as the other engine programs and platforms out there. So, um, getting away from that in the long term is probably a good thing for Kaulig, outside of potentially getting higher support from Ram or Dodge. But I guess quickly, just on that point, what we've heard, and this is speculative in nature, but one of the things that we heard, that it was possible that Dodge was looking to partner with another program, and that program likely being RCR, with their relationship with Kaulig, and potentially using the ECR engine program to steer the Dodge engine program into the next couple of years. It doesn't seem like that's very likely at this point, but is there any ideas of where the Dodge engine program is at currently, and where they're kind of fostering their eggs in the basket to build that engine?
Well, what it seemed to me when they made the announcements, and from what I've heard, is that they were trying to build it primarily themselves. So I don't think I have heard any links to ECR or any other existing engine program. But if there were a team that has an engine program that they could take, I mean, I think RCR is that team. It's sort of the lone wolf at this point of still making engines when every other team is consolidated. All the TRD engines, all the Ford engines are all one umbrella, and all the rest of the Chevy teams are all Hendrick engines. So I think that if there is a team that still makes its own engines that they could take, it would be RCR. However, I have not heard anything about that.
Yeah, I know a lot of people have linked ours. Like, at the end of the day, we're getting a little ahead. We'll backtrack to the other topics in a second, but like, fast forward to let's say it's 2027. If you listen to the head of Stellantis, who at the end of the day is the guy that holds more power than Chris Rice, Ty Norris, Matt Kaulig, all of them combined, Tim Kuniskis, he was very adamant to Kevin Harvick that it would be he wants 2027. He was told that that was ambitious, but that he wants 2027. And then I started doing some research myself, and there's less to do in today's NASCAR to prepare than there was back in 2001 when Ray Abraham built the Dodge. That was an entirely different chassis for all those cars, bodies, engines, and he did everything from scratch in 493 days. And there's more time now with less to do to prepare for that 2027 season. The last thing that I heard was it was the SRT division, which is already up and running and is already working on Cup stuff. Now, that doesn't mean they're close to anything. It sounds like they're in the infancy. But that combined with the fact that Kaulig Racing is all of a sudden hiring a ton of engineers when they didn't have a bunch of engineers before, I'm connecting the dots here, man, and I think you're right. I think this is going to be an SRT driven thing, which is the street and racing division over at Dodge, and like Ryan and I have harped on for years now, Kaulig needs engineers. We had Mike Cook, who is the technical director of the Cup Series for Kaulig Racing, on our channel. We did like a 4-part video series with him, and it became very clear that the reason why he's the technical director, Trent Owens is the crew chief of AJ, and Andrew Dickinson's the crew chief of Ty Dillon, is because they all have engineering backgrounds, and Kaulig lacks engineering, just engineers in general in their shop. And now Chris Rice comes out and says, yeah, we've hired 2 engineers who've already started. We got a few more starting, and we know they're going to need some on the truck side, even though it's a spec engine. It feels like between that and the SRT thing that Dodge might just go the route of like a TRD and like do their own thing. I think you're right with that, but I will ask this. On top of that, I don't know if you think that's likely that they go that way, but it can't just be Kaulig. As much as Ryan and I are Kaulig fans and follow the team, you can't come into the Cup Series in 2027 or 2028 and have 2 cars. Even let's say Dodge buys them a third charter, because I don't think Matt Kaulig's going to pay for it, but I could see Dodge wanting a third car. 3 cars is still not enough. Who do you think that potential other team could be if it's not going to be RCR? Like, it can't just be Kaulig.
Yeah, I'll start with just saying that kind of echoes what I'd heard about the Dodge program. I hadn't heard it was specifically going to be SRT, which would be interesting. I think that's a good name to bring into NASCAR. But yeah, that sort of is the idea of the program kind of in-house with Dodge that I'd been hearing about. In terms of bringing in other teams, I think what I see is sticking with Trackhouse and expanding the team like they did with the Truck Series, having 5 cars in one team. The limit, obviously, in Cup is 3. You can't put 5 in. But I think, I mean, it reminds me of Toyota with Joe Gibbs, and sticking with one team to come into the sport, I think makes it a little bit easier than having to manage multiple different programs. And as soon as Kaulig and the Dodge program is up, then adding in more teams potentially, maybe a Trackhouse or a Spire or someone sees the performance from Dodge and decides to come over, like Legacy moved from Chevrolet to Toyota. But I think I see, from what I've seen, it looks like they're probably going to start with one team.
Ryan?
Yeah, I mean, I think that makes a lot of sense from that developmental standpoint, and I can certainly see that because that's obviously JGR was Toyota's lone team for a substantial amount of time. You know, we have heard and we know they talked to Trackhouse, and that conversation seemed to have faded over time, and now we've started to hear rumblings that maybe Honda is coming back into the sport, but we don't have any real official information on that. If they don't go Honda, or if the deal with Honda doesn't pan out, yeah, I guess maybe I would still look towards Trackhouse in the future. But it seems like with the potential 4th OEM getting into this or I guess 5th OEM potentially in the future, it really murkies these waters even more so.
Yeah, I agree. I don't know how much I trust Honda. I feel like Honda, even in IndyCar where they already are, they always seem to suggest they want to change things, move hybrid or move something different, or even move out of the sport, and never really end up changing all that much. So I'm always skeptical when Honda comes in, Honda's rumors come in, but I would certainly love to see a 5th OEM.
I'm just going to come out and ask the question because there's been so much hinting around it, and I couldn't believe how long they got into that press conference that we covered on the weekend without someone just asking the question. I know that they can't outright say, hey, we're going racing with Dodge, because it feels like they've found a way to maintain some minimal Chevy support rather than being cut right off, seems to be the implication at the moment. But do you, like most others, think that this is inevitably leading to Kaulig going with Dodge?
Yes, I don't see another way this partnership goes, and I don't see a reason for Kaulig really to jump into trucks unless there's a sort of longer term deal. I think that you might see a little bit more performance in trucks, but at the cost of developing an existing Xfinity and Cup infrastructure to move to the lowest of the NASCAR National Series, I just don't see the benefit of moving towards a development program unless there's something coming down the road.
So Chris did say at the presser that they chose Ram chose them, and while he was very quick to limit, I guess, expectations for results, I would assume for next season, he also made the comment that they need to perform for Dodge to potentially take the next steps. Speaking hypothetically, is there really a situation where they wouldn't go with Kaulig in the future for a Cup program based off of how close they've built this relationship at the truck level?
I mean, I can't speak to Stellantis and what their specific red lines are. It would surprise me, especially given that Dodge is putting so much of their own investment in. If the performance didn't pay off, I think a lot of that, that Ram is putting a lot of its own investment in. If the performance didn't pay off, I mean, I think a lot of that would probably reflect to some extent on just how much that team has developed with the Ram funding and with the Ram integration. So I think there would be an element of both sides, and I don't think it's reasonable for Ram to expect this team to be running up front competing for wins every weekend in their first year. So I don't think it's a sort of situation where Ram is expecting a championship to go Cup racing. I see a longer term partnership out of this, and I think both sides see it at this point, or else this deal would not be in the scale it is.
Well, that certainly puts me at ease, because that's that would just be the most Kaulig thing ever for them to make this jump, and then for it to have the rug pulled out from under them because they didn't perform well enough at the truck level in year one. So, but yeah, that's also the investment, as you said. Well, we don't know the numbers, feels like it's a significant investment, not only from Kaulig, but especially from Dodge. And it even sounds like, I hope I don't step on your toes here, Sean, but we heard it sounds like Dodge has had a very large say in who these drivers are going to be. And while they haven't made an announcement yet, it certainly sounds like they have their eyes set on a set of drivers, and Dodge is likely invested significantly in who those drivers are.
Yeah, that's Chris Rice basically said as much this morning. He was trying to tiptoe around it a bit, but he really put the onus on Ram and said, they have a significant say in who's in these trucks and that their lineup's almost set. And we do know that the little bit of the entertainment industry that I dabble in for my other piece of content creation. That Ram truck show is likely going to happen. Dana White has attached himself, like the Dana White UFC has attached himself as an executive producer, and a name that big typically does not attach himself to a show unless that show is going to get made. Now, I'm not saying that show is going to contain, Jim, Bob, and Joe who live down the street from you, but there'll be short track drivers, late model drivers, maybe even sports car drivers that have a chance to earn seat time, but I can't see them giving the winner, or however they do that show, here's, 26 truck races in our fifth truck. Most believe that it's going to be 4 full-time trucks and then 5 full-time trucks with 4 full-time drivers. And then that other truck's going to have a rotation of drivers. But Ryan and I spoke on our Patreon program that we have a hard time seeing it being a traditional all-star truck because, well, if Chevy's the one saying, and we don't know this, it's speculative, but if General Motors had said, hey, yeah, fine, we'll give you the little support that we've been giving you, but those trucks have got to be in another shop, I have a hard time seeing General Motors being okay with, yeah, go ahead, AJ Allmendinger, Ty Dillon, and Christian Eckes, go run that fifth truck, even though technically you're under contract with us as well as Kaulig. It's going to have to be a unique thing with that fifth truck. But I'll ask you, Owen, who have you heard that's connected to that truck program? Because, I mean, the thumbnail to the left of us here shows a few of the names that we've heard. But have you heard any names yourself other than what's already been out there?
Well, I just want to take that last point you made, which I think is really interesting about the All-Star truck. I think they're taking Spire trucks, and Spire obviously has 2 All-Star trucks going this year. So I think it's kind of an interesting model because the drivers in those All-Star trucks are just the Chevy drivers, really. It's Chevy All-Stars, but certainly, Kyle Busch, All-Star drivers themselves. But it'll be interesting to see what an All-Star truck, if this was the case, an All-Star truck in that sort of Spire lens without a manufacturer loyalty would look like. But I mean, I think that the drivers we've heard, or I've seen, the obvious one is Daniel Dye, right? The announcement was made in his dad's dealership. He's a current Xfinity driver for the team. They talked about at the announcement having a long-term future. They didn't necessarily say in the Xfinity series and the Cup series anything. I could certainly see them moving him in a development role over to that truck series seat. 2 other names I've seen linked. Brendan Queen, Butterbean Queen, the current ARCA series driver, ARCA series points leader and ARCA driver, I've seen a couple times his name linked to the team. And then Corey LaJoie very publicly on Twitter mentioned that he would be interested in driving for the team. I don't know if that's advanced any further, but it does seem like those are the 2 names I've seen repeated a couple times.
Yeah, on the Corey LaJoie front, I thought what was telling is following Kaulig as closely as we have. They typically don't engage in social media stuff unless something's either happening or has a good chance of happening. And it was their Kaulig Trucks account who replied to Corey LaJoie and went, 2 LaJoies under one roof, because his brother spots for them, and I believe he did some other work for him. That made me go, okay, well, maybe that's already a done deal quietly, and Chris Rice has already said the truck lineup's almost set. The other name that's not a driver, who was very publicly lobbying for a job,
Yes.
is Rodney Childers. Do you see a fit there? Not necessarily just as a crew chief, but Rodney has an engineering background as well and could serve as a a pretty high level executive for them.
Yeah, I mean, I think he would certainly be helpful, really, any team. I mean, we know he was a big hire for Spire, obviously. I think the big issue is realistically he chose to leave Spire because he didn't feel like he was fitting in with the team. The team wasn't working. I think at this point in his career, he's a champion himself. I think it's going to be up to Rodney Childers and whether Rodney Childers feels like it's the sort of team he wants to join more than anything on Kaulig's end. So I don't know if there's anything we can predict there, but I think it'd be very interesting to see him up on the pit box or in the team advising any sort of role he takes. But I think at this point he knows he does not need to be in the sport at all if he wants to join and finds a program that he feels like kind of aligns with his interests.
Ryan?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have much to add outside of I think that's a great point about where Rodney's at in his career, and he's going to do he's best for him and what he sees as as a path forward. I just think it's quite telling that he's made some public statements on X, and he's liked and commented a little bit on some of our posts. So at least seems like there's interest there. Whether anything comes to fruition is obviously to be seen. But as you said, he would make an excellent add to any organization he would join, and that would certainly be something I would love to see if it can happen.
Yes.
You brought up Brendan Queen's name, better known as Butterbean to most. One of the things that Ryan and I have been on for a couple of years now is the need for a pipeline and development. And they started to get that a little bit with the hirings of Daniel Dye and Christian Eckes, and now if they can bring Brendan Queen into this, ARCA points leader, I think he's won 5 times this year. He's a little on the older side for a prospect, but sometimes guys don't make it to the Cup Series till they're in their early 30s, so that would line up. A bunch of people have had his name out there. We've talked about it. You've talked about it. I know Eric Estep talked about it. Dale Earnhardt Jr. said he'd heard Brendan Queen's name over there. How big of a get would that be just in terms of the future for Kaulig Racing?
Yeah, I mean, I think I take it back. The last time when you talk about having a sort of maybe an older driver coming in was Josh Berry, and what Harvick talked about with Josh Berry when he came into that program, and just having a sort of older driver who's kind of worked his way up and grinded at the lower levels of racing in some of the late models and local racing, and having that experience and that sort of resilience, I think, that has really proven really helpful with Josh Berry, moving multiple teams in his Cup Series career, starting as a substitute in the Cup Series and pulling the results together. I think that Berry's proven a guy who can really kind of build a team around him. And I think that I don't know exactly as much about how Butterbean will work with a team like that, but I think that there's certainly a lot to be said for a driver who's had to work up that route and that kind of development prospect.
Sean, you when we were on the Patreon video last night, you posed a question, of the 4 drivers we kind of predicted, Daniel Dye, Corey LaJoie, Butterbean, would there be enough maturity, enough leadership to have relatively young drivers? And I look at a Corey LaJoie who similarly had to grind his way to the top, and he worked on his cars over at Spire in the early days. And, even Daniel Dye seems like he's taken quite the role of maybe not necessarily being a leader at his age, but he's very invested and he's done all of the odd jobs that Kaulig seems to have asked of him. And I feel the same way as you just said with Butterbean, how he's had to grind his way to where he's at. Even though I would expect there to be a lot of younger faces potentially driving these Dodge vehicles, I feel like the leadership and support would be there to build a foundation for Kaulig, and not just in the short term, but potentially in the long term as well.
And it is the Truck Series as well, so I think that is the place to develop some of the younger drivers. So I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing if they're looking at a sort of Dodge development pipeline to have some younger drivers in those seats to potentially fill the Dodge the Dodge seats in the future. Maybe a third Dodge seat if they add up the full number of seats a full number of cars before they come in.
Yeah, well, I mean, theoretically, if that happens, the three most rumored names, LaJoie, Butterbean, and Dye, that leaves you with one potential fourth full-time seat. And Ryan and I were very unsure if they would do business with Daniel Hemrick again, or rather, if Daniel Hemrick would do business with them again. And well, that was proven to be wrong. As next weekend he's going to drive the 11 Xfinity car for them. So I do wonder if that opens up a possibility for Daniel Hemrick to return to Kaulig in the Truck Series. Although I mentioned to Ryan earlier today, I'm like, if I'm Bill McNally, I'm not sure I'm in a rush to see Hemrick leave because he's performed pretty well for that team.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's obviously a step down from Xfinity Championship, but he's had a very good season in the Truck Series. And spoke to him at Richmond. He seemed pretty happy with the performance. Seemed like he was in a pretty good place with his performance this year. So I don't think he's necessarily unhappy with the McAnally team.
The other name, I don't know if you know anything about that was thrown out there, and I didn't even know who this person was until Dale Earnhardt Jr. threw it out there. Was I believe he's the current Cars Tour points leader, is Connor Hall, who drives for Junior Motorsports. Impressive stat line that's posted on juniormotorsports.com. Have you heard of Connor Hall at all? And could you see them going, like, if the drivers were LaJoie, Dye, and Butterbean, could they add another young driver in that fourth car, or do you think they'd be likely to go with a veteran of some sort?
I mean, I've heard of him, but I had not heard that name linked at all. I did not see Junior link it at all, so I had not seen that at all previously myself. I could see it. Again, like I said, I think that having LaJoie especially gives you a sort of veteran presence, and I think that a Truck Series team, there's nothing wrong with going for primarily younger drivers just to develop that program, especially with the Dodge element in the long term. So purely speculatively, I could see it. It just is not something I've heard previously.
I guess I want to circle back a little bit to a comment you made a few minutes ago about, the Spire trucks and them having multiple all-star trucks. Just speaking specifically of Spire and what their goals are in the Truck Series, we all kind of agreed for them to go 5 trucks deep next year. They're likely going to have to purchase car or trucks. They're like, I'm sure they'll build their own. But what have you heard about where the Spire truck program stands? It doesn't sound like they want to fully get out of the trucks, but maybe downsize that program. And then with that, a driver like Raja Karuth potentially being on the market as well. Is there anything rumor or any truth to where that's going?
I mean, Spire, with the links to Hendrick that they and Raja personally both have, I think that at least one Spire truck will probably continue with Raja in it. Obviously, we've seen, Bob Pockris has talked about it. We've seen that the Spire trucks are linked to Kaulig, and that's probably where they're going to get the majority, at least some of their trucks, if not the majority of their trucks. So I think they're going to downsize, and I think the all-star side might suffer a little bit. But I think that Raja is going to stay somewhere in the Hendrick pipeline, and I think in the Truck Series, that's Spire at the moment.
I know Corey Day was linked to possibly going Truck Series racing with them too, who's a Hendrick prospect. So maybe it ends up being Caruth and Day, and I don't know who their other full-time driver is. So do you either of you know who the other Spire full-time driver is? Because I can't think of it off the top of my head.
They released him. It was Andre Perez.
Yes, You're right. They did release him. We got to get ready to wrap this thing up here shortly. We had a list that we put on Patreon last night. We're going to pop it up. Some of these names are outlandish. We were having some fun and speculating. But out of these names, is there anyone that we haven't talked about yet that you could see possibly landing in one of these trucks?
We've got a nice long list. I mean, the names I've heard are the 3 I brought up: like LaJoie, Butterbean, and Daniel Dye. I could see Daniel Hemrick. I think potentially Haley if there's no other option in the Cup Series, but I don't think that's likely. The rest of the names I think are a little bit more on the long shot side of things. Connor Hall, if that's linked through Dale Jr. But other than that, the rest of the names I think are a little bit more long shots. But obviously, this whole program is to some extent a long shot, so nothing will necessarily surprise me too much now.
Yeah, the Connor Hall thing from Dale Jr. is, he mentioned it on his, would have been the episode before he had Chase Briscoe on. Um, you know, whether there's anything legitimate behind that, I don't know, because it could just be a team owner going to bat for one of his drivers, saying, "Hey, he deserves a shot." Dale Jr. seems like that type. Like he was all over about Josh Berry getting a shot with someone. So,
Yes.
all right, final topic here, and it'll be a quick one. That is not it. My apologies. NASCAR playoff changes. So there's a bunch of talk that maybe the playoffs might change a bit. I don't think they're ever going to go back to the Winston Cup era where there's no playoffs at all. That doesn't make a lot of sense to me. But I will say it's a little frustrating when a guy who's 28th or 29th in points can win one race and leapfrog like 12 or 13 other guys. Where are some changes that you would like to see with or what are some changes you'd like to see with the playoff structure?
I mean, I had this conversation at Richmond, and it's interesting from my personal perspective. I am completely biased because how I watch races is just to look for a storyline, right? And I think the playoffs do such a good job in that respect of just creating a storyline. Sometimes when maybe there shouldn't be, because as you say, Austin Dillon winning at Richmond immediately propels himself into the playoffs from a 28th place point position, or a driver right on the points bubble advances into the playoffs when otherwise they just had a 12th place day or something to that effect. It creates these storylines. So from my perspective, I like the playoffs just in in my role as a casual viewer. I think the answer that, or not a casual, but as a fan relatively, I think the answer that most appeals to me is extending the final round. I think having multiple rounds of 3 races and a final round of 1 race means that one race you can be Christopher Bell and crash into the wall with some brake failure and just be out of it completely. I think having multiple races to not just tie it to Phoenix, not just tie it to Homestead, or not just tie it to any one specific track, but allow drivers to get more of a really determine who's the best of those 4 drivers over a 3 race fight would be a little bit more interesting to me. And I think once you make the points that close together and reset them, there's no way any driver could run away with it. So even if NASCAR's worst fear comes true and Byron locks up the regular season championship and locks up the full championship 1 race early, that can't happen in this format with 3 races to go.
Yeah, I agree with that statement as well. And I think everybody has their own opinion, and no opinion is right, wrong, or indifferent. But I feel like a 4-3-3 scenario makes the most sense to me, where you go 4 races in the first round and you eliminate 8 drivers, go from 16 to 8, and then 3 races from 8 to 4, and then you have a final 3 races for a championship 4. To me, that just makes a lot of sense, but I doubt that's something that would come to fruition.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a long conversation within NASCAR, and I know they're having that conversation. They've spoken about that, which I do respect for them coming out and saying, we are reviewing this. We know we need to at least look at it. We've seen the fan response, and so I think there will be some changes. We've seen Homestead, for instance, put back in the finale after a lot of fans asked for that, and I think that's going to be a great thing in the next couple of years. So I think they will make changes in at some point, but I don't see the playoffs going away in any sense, or at least the chase of some variety of postseason going away.
Yeah, I don't think people would like the way that I would do it. I'm all about chaos and TV ratings and getting more eyeballs on the sport. And I participated in an iRacing league. This is going back almost 10 years ago now. And there's about 26 or 27 of us that would run in it. 16 people made the playoffs. And the way that their chaotic playoffs went down was there was 6 playoff races. And in the first 5 races, 2 drivers would get eliminated every single race based on where you finished in that race. It wasn't based on points. So if you were the 2 bottom finishers in that race, your season was done. And I get that that might be unconventional, but boy, it added a lot of chaos and drama. And I feel like it would add a lot to, eyeballs on the sport, but it might not, be the best for certain sponsors who want to be in the playoffs for at least 3 or 4 races, and all of a sudden they're out after 1. But that's the way that I would go with it, just for the chaoticness of it all. But I don't think we're ever going back to the Winston Cup era. I know that's what Mark Martin wants, but it's 2025, and I think that era is, for the lack of a better term, dead and gone.
I will say, just for the sake of argument, because we were talking about this at Richmond quite a bit with some of my colleagues in the media center, was we were looking at the IndyCar ratings quite a bit this weekend, and IndyCar's been holding, or outside of around the Indy 500, they've been holding around 600 to 700,000 every week, which is not as many viewers as they would certainly like to be getting, and that's a different question. But they've been able to hold that number consistently. And then Alex Below goes and wraps up the championships. I was really watching what the ratings would be like after that at Milwaukee with the championship done and dusted. 700 again. So very consistent ratings. Now, I think the question for NASCAR is IndyCar only getting their core fans right now? Are they not really expanding to other fans? And do other fans want to see a playoff system? Do they want something more than just racing, whereas the core fans are going to turn on every single weekend? I think that's a question for NASCAR to answer, but it does make an argument that, you'll still get your fans even with the championship wrapped up.
I guess my question for you is NASCAR adding beyond their core fans? Because it certainly doesn't feel like it. The ratings have been either stagnant or dipping for the better part of a decade at this point, even with all of these massive changes to the format. And, I don't actually feel like it's benefited them.
I will say the past couple of years have been an improvement to some extent, although this year has somewhat dipped a little bit. But the past couple of years have been an improvement, and especially the at-track product has improved massively. But then again, the at-track product is also generally the core fans, specifically the people willing to come out to the race. So I agree with you. I think they're not expanding as much as they would like to be. And yeah, perhaps that's an argument to go back and maybe not, if not go back to the full season-long points, maybe go back to a chase or something like that was there back in 2005 when they did have the big growth in fans.
I feel like TV ratings across the board, though, have fallen, not just with NASCAR, but almost every motorsport and major sport in North America. There's just so many different ways that you can view the product now and set your PVRs and watch it not even live, and then those numbers don't get reflected in the Nielsen ratings. It's a vastly different thing in today's entertainment industry than what it used to be. I would argue that I'm glad they only took away one road course, because I think the best they've done in terms of expanding their fan base was expanding the road courses and getting more of an international audience in there. And I know, was it Steve Phelps? Someone recently was with Eric Estep on his channel and was mentioning that, we want to appeal to the grassroots, fans, but we also need to appeal to the international fans. And there was a hint that, 1 year might be the grassroots heavy schedule and then the international heavy schedule the following year. And, I think international fans, say what you want about oval racing, they want to see road courses. They want to see beating and banging between the best on those tracks. So do you have a similar feeling in terms of NASCAR expansion needing to be on a non-traditional track?
Well, I mean, I think that's the way we've always run with the schedule story over the past couple of years. Is NASCAR's done, in my mind, and I think we all at Cup Scene really they seem to do a really good job of appealing to both. So you've got more races in North Carolina than we've ever really had in the past couple of years, and we've got more races in Mexico and San Diego, in Chicago, doing these new kind of big events. So you're kind of getting the best of both worlds, I think. And I think I was talking about this at Richmond because it ended up being Richmond on the hot seat to lose a date in exchange for Mexico this year. And I happened to speak to one fan for my story who didn't want NASCAR to leave the country at all and wanted it to be as close to the Southeast as it could be, close to its core fans. And then I just happened on one family from France who came just to see Richmond, and because it happened to align with the holiday weekend, and they said, we would love a race in Europe. And we know there's a lot of French fans who feel the same. So there's definitely a gamut of fans, and there's definitely a broad range. And just in my little straw poll there, you can see the kind of range in fans we have. And I think NASCAR's done an okay job, I think, of trying to appeal to both, getting growth in the sort of home region and expanding away. But it's difficult. It's difficult to make everybody happy, but we have a lot of races to do it.
Yeah, I think it's one thing I've observed, and it's not really a question, just the fact that NASCAR, I want to give NASCAR their props the last 5 years, maybe more at this point, that they've been willing to change the schedule. And every year there has been a 2 or 3 changes, significant changes even year to year, trying different things, trying to appeal to different bases, which I think is a huge step in the right direction, because there was a long, long time there between, early teens to the early 20s where the schedule didn't change at all. It's very stagnant. So I guess I'm very pleased to see that NASCAR is willing to branch out and make these changes to try to expand their base.
Yeah.
All right. So as we get ready to wrap up here, Owen, we really appreciate you doing this. I know we went about 10, 12 minutes too long here, but where can everybody find you at, and what do you guys got going on?
Yeah, thank you very much for having me on. It's always a pleasure, and it's great to talk to you. You can find me at cupscene.com or Owen ____ Johnson on Twitter, on X. And follow my editor at Cupscene on Twitter as well. Follow our site.
Awesome. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, turn notifications to all for bonus content. Please check out our Patreon, available at patreon.com/Kaulignation. The link is in the description below. Follow us on X at Kaulignation, at Rammin is Racing, and at Yount Racing 45. We will be back with more content this weekend with Darlington. We got Portland as well. You know, maybe Kaulig has a shot at a win at Portland. Will Brown's running for them, and Connor Zilish is still healing up, so maybe he won't be at his best. We'll see, but I wouldn't count him out. That's going to do it for us, though. Big thank you to Owen. Ryan, have a great night, man. And we will see each and every one of you in the next video.